Reincarnation, also known as rebirth or transmigration, is the concept that the non-physical essence of a living being begins a new life in a different physical body after biological death. The following could be interpreted as a classic case of reincarnation. Beverly S from New Jersey, USA, was just 17 when she gave birth to her first son, who she named Brent. Like many babies, the child cried a lot, and for a young mother she found she was unable to cope and found the situation totally overwhelming. In total frustration, she would shake the cot and scream at him to be quiet, and would leave his room to avoid the temptation of shaking him. Things did not improve for the baby when his drunken father arrived home and kicked the child when he found him crawling along the floor, and unfortunately the mother did nothing, fearing her drunken partner. On another occasion, the father pointed a loaded gun at the baby's head, but again out of fear, she did not intervene. As Brent got older, she would often hit him if he did something wrong. Years later, she admitted that she was a bad mother at the time. When Brent was 5 years old, Beverly had another child who she named Scott, but by that stage her relationship with the father had soured, and she took the children and moved out of their apartment. After being in a violent relationship, and not surprisingly she remained single for the next 15 years, where the father withdrew from the family and only called at Christmas. For some strange reason, Brent missed his father, even after his violent upbringing. Beverly also suffered from guilt for not protecting her son from his father, and the family attended family counselling. At 14, Brent got his wish and moved in with his father, who was now living in Germany. And at this stage, Beverly was now married to a man called Bruce. Brent stayed with his father for 4 years, but came back to live with his mother and brother at the age of 18. On his return, Beverly apologised to her son for his father and her own cruel behaviour, putting it down to her immaturity at the time he was born. Brent complained about a recurrent nightmare where he is fighting for his life, but couldn't see what the danger was or who he was fighting, but he did fear that it could have been some sort of premonition that he would die young. On August 25, 1992, his mother received a late-night call from the police telling her that Brent had been involved in a serious car crash where it hit a tree and smashed his forehead into the steering wheel, resulting in a serious brain injury. He was still alive when his mother arrived to the hospital, but was unconscious. The doctor said he could not hear her, but she nevertheless told him that if he died, she would miss him more than anything in the world. Brent pressed the fingers to acknowledge her as a tear ran down the corner of his eye. The incident threw Beverly into total shock. Over the next few years, on numerous occasions, Beverly would unexpectedly find herself surrounded by a spiral of light, and could sense her deceased son's presence, and would speak to him. 2 years after the death of her son, she was preparing food in the kitchen and smelt the distinctive scent of Jovan musk perfume. When Brent was a child, he and his mother would play a game where he would smother himself with the perfume and then run away. His mother would then follow the scent before finding him. After his death, she threw out all of the perfume as she did not want to be reminded of him. There could be no other explanation for the scent, and she interpreted this as a message from her son. Although she felt comforted, it did not mask the guilt she still felt for his terrible childhood. In 1994, at the age of 39, Beverly became pregnant again, and in the 7th month, she had a strange, vivid and realistic dream. Brent was walking towards her, and there was a little boy standing behind him. He smiled and pointed to the boy and said, "Mummy, this is for you." She immediately awoke and felt that Brent was making contact with her again. In June 1995, she gave birth to a son who she called Jesse, and when they first handed him over to her, she noticed a large strawberry-coloured birthmark covering almost his entire forehead. When Jess arrived home, he would scream all of the time, just as Brent had done, although he looked nothing like his brother, his father, or her. His face, hair, and body were strikingly similar to Brent when he was a baby. After his first birthday, Jesse began to utter simple words and pointed to a picture of Brent and said, "Me, me." His mother said that it was a picture of Brent, his brother, and that they looked very similar, but Jess insisted on saying, "Me." He repeated it again a year later when they were visiting his grandmother's. As they were looking at photos together, they came across one of Brent as a baby, and again he screamed, "Me, mummy, me!" When Jess was 18 months old and was visiting his grandmother, he saw her light up a cigarette and quickly jumped up and blew out the flame. Everyone was speechless because this was the exact same behaviour that Brent had displayed back then. Brent hated seeing his grandmother smoke and would blow out a match every time she lit a cigarette, and now Jess did this every time after that. At around the same time, Beverly was in the neighbour's yard pushing Jess on the swing. Then he suddenly jumped off and ran into the backyard of the neighbour's house. Beverly followed him and watched as he appeared to be looking for something. As he strolled across the yard, he walked over to the pergola in the front yard of yet another house, and he appeared to either know where he was going or something was drawing him there. He then stopped and stared at the building, which happened to be the apartment building where Beverly had raised Brent, but she had never ever taken him there before. To a child as young as Jess, this was a long distance. She asked him why he was standing there looking at the house, and he just smiled, turned around and led his mother down the street to yet another house, which also had a swing. He obviously seemed to know his way around because it was the same swing that Brent used to play on when he was little. This was a light bulb moment when Beverly was convinced that Jess was a reincarnation of her deceased son Brent. This came as an instant relief to her, as she always felt guilty about her terrible behaviour towards him. She now started to make comparisons and noticed that Jess had learned to walk by kicking a soccer ball around, just like Brent had. Jess was always fascinated by balls, just like Brent. There was also more specific behaviour that both children exhibited, where as soon as Jess could sit upright and point to something, he would point to hats and want one. By the age of 3, he already owned at least 3 dozen hats, in different colours and shapes. Everywhere they went, if he saw a hat, he had to have it, and would wear them all the time if he could. Beverly knew of no other children that had such an unusual habit, and up till now, the only child she could think of like that was Brent, because back then, he too liked to wear all kinds of hats all of the time, and everywhere they went, just like Jess does. When Jess was 4 years old, he and his mother were listening to a report on the radio about a 4-year-old child who set fire to his house and badly burned himself. Beverly then explained to Jess what the report was about and that it was dangerous to play with fire. Jess nodded and then said, "Yes, Mum, just like when the bathroom caught fire and I had to save my brother." His mother was completely astonished and taken aback by his comments and asked him to repeat what had just said. He replied, "When I lived in my other house," and she asked, "Where did you live?" and he replied, "Down there near Grandma's house." What he said was correct. When Brent and Scott were still small, they lived with their mother for a while in an apartment close to their grandmother's apartment. One day when the boys were sitting in the bathtub, the power went out. Brent was 8 and Scott was 3. Beverly told them to stay quiet and that she would get some candles. She brought the candles and lit them. She then told the boys to stay in the bath as she wanted to get their pyjamas and left the room. She had barely left the bathroom when Scott climbed out of the tub, and in doing so, he knocked over a candle. It fell into the trash can and started a fire. Brent had the presence of mind to quickly grab his brother and pushed him out of the bathroom. The whole event only took a few seconds, but Brent had actually saved his brother. On another occasion, where Jess eventually reached the age where he was able to play with many other children, and in the process had naturally picked up a few bad habits from them. On one occasion, Beverly had to remind him not to stick your tongue out at anyone, and when he did it again, she raised a hand and gently slapped him on the cheek and said, "Don't do that again, it's inappropriate." It was the first time she had physically punished Jess, even though it was a light tap. However, Jess appeared to overact and burst into tears, and she had a difficult time calming him down. After a few minutes, she picked him up and asked, "What is it? Why are you so shocked?" Jess stopped crying and looked his mother straight into the eyes and said, "Don't hit me, Mummy. Don't hit me like you used to." That was the last straw for his mother, and from that moment, reincarnation was now a reality for her.